Hello everyone, in this video we are going to answer the questions of reading quiz chapter 17. Chapter 17 explains government and the role of government in the economy. And also chapter 17 talks about fiscal policy and discretionary fiscal policy and automatic stabilizers that you need to know how the government reacts during the recession in the economy. So let's start with the first question. The first question is asking who prepares and passes the federal budget. So the right answer is President and the Congress. Question 2. What causes the crowding out effect? So when you read chapter 17, you may realize that there are some dangers of fiscal policy. One of them is crowding out. So the idea of, for instance, expansionary fiscal policy is to increase spending or decrease taxes. So if you remember, the expansionary fiscal policy targets aggregate demand curve. Aggregate demand curve is the sum of consumption plus government expenditures plus investment plus net exports. So by increasing spending, government spending here, AD is going to shift to the right. And with the increasing aggregate demand curve shifting to the right, we will have higher GDP. Higher GDP means lower unemployment and higher prices in the economy. So if we just draw the curve, here is the price level, here is the output, this is aggregate demand, this is aggregate supply. Any increase in aggregate demand is going to shift the aggregate demand to the right. And you see we have more output, therefore lower unemployment and higher prices with the expansionary fiscal policy. But crowding out effect says that when government increases its expenditure, it is also going to borrow money, borrow funds from the market, and that is going to make funds less available to the private sector. Because of the government spending, we see an increase in borrowing, and that leads to higher interest rate. There is going to be a crowding out effect of this higher interest rate on private sector. Why? Because private sector now needs to pay higher interest rate to borrow money. So remember, when the interest rates are higher, investment spending going down. So on one hand, you want to increase government spending to shift the AD curve. On the other hand, because of higher interest rate, investment is going down. So that is called crowding out. Therefore, what causes the government crowding out effect? Government borrowing and spending. Question number 3. How can a budget deficit be reduced? So what is budget deficit? Let's first remember what a budget deficit is. Budget deficit is T represents the tax revenue and G represents the government spending. If T minus G is less than 0, that means the revenue that the government collects is not enough to cover its spending, then we have budget deficit. So how can we reduce the budget deficit? Decreasing government spending is an option. When you decrease the government spending, you are actually subtracting a lower number, and or increasing taxes. And also if you increase taxes, you can increase the revenue. Therefore, you can reduce the budget deficit. So for that reason, the first option is correct. Others are not correct. Lowering the taxes is going to make government revenue less. If you raise the government spending, you're subtracting a bigger number from T. Therefore, both options are going to worsen the budget deficit. By only increasing T, this is not also fully accurate because you can either increase T and or decrease G. How does a declining national debt indicate? So we need to first understand the difference between national debt and deficit. So deficit refers to higher government spending than government's revenue, tax revenue, in one period. Let's say government has a deficit of $10 million. That means the government spends more money than the tax revenue, and there is 10 million deficit, which could be financed by borrowing. So this refers to, let's say, 2020, one period. And when we come to 2021, let's say the government has again budget deficit, and this time government budget deficit is 20 million, and this could be financed by borrowing. So the debt, the total amount of debt becomes 10 million from 2020, 20 million from 2021, 30 million. That 30 million refers to accumulation of the debt over the year. So that refers accumulation of borrowing over the period. So this is the difference between deficit and debt. So what does a declining national debt indicate? That means government is making some surpluses some years, right? With the surplus, government can pay back the debt. So let's find out which answer corresponds to this. The first one says the government is receiving more money in taxes than it spends in a year, so that represents a surplus. For that reason, this is correct. The government is spending more money than it receives in taxes for a given year, then the government is making deficit. The government is going to accumulate more debt because of the deficit. The unemployment rate is declining. This is not related to government debt. The rate of inflation declining. This is not related to government or national debt. Question 5. Which of the following is not an example of automatic stabilizers? So we have two types of fiscal policy. One is discretionary fiscal policy and the other one is automatic stabilizers. So discretionary fiscal policy requires government to enact a new policy. For instance, stimulus checks that we have received during COVID-19 is a discretionary fiscal policy. It's not something happened automatically because we were in a recession. For automatic stabilizers, the Congress and the President doesn't have to meet and make the decision. They automatically become active during the recession and also inflationary period. One example of automatic stabilizer is unemployment insurance. When we have recession, we have more unemployed people, therefore more unemployment insurance is paid. And in the periods of good economic times, the unemployment rate decreases, therefore there is not that much need for unemployment insurance. Food stamps and personal income taxes are the same. During the recession, more people are receiving food stamps and people are paying less income tax. But during the good economic times, food stamps are decreasing, personal income taxes are increasing. But stimulus package is discretionary fiscal policy. So the stimulus package is one time and it's not like automatic stabilizers that it happens every time we have recession. Question 6. Examine the following policies and determine which would decrease the level of aggregate demand. So let's remember aggregate demand equation: consumption plus government spending plus investment plus net exports. So we are using fiscal policy. We could increase government spending to increase aggregate demand. But the question is asking how we can decrease aggregate demand. Therefore, we should decrease government spending to decrease aggregate demand. But it's not the only way. You can also change the tax. If the taxes decreases, we will increase the aggregate demand curve. But if the taxes increases, we will decrease the aggregate demand curve. The reason is because consumption is going to be less. After tax income is going to go down if you increase the taxes. So if we want to reduce AD, we have two options. The first option, to decrease government spending. The second option, increase tax rates. So we can find the right answer. Decreasing government spending and increasing in taxes, the first one is the correct answer. If the US Congress passes legislation to raise taxes to control inflation, what kind of policy is this? So we are actually increasing taxes. This is contractionary fiscal policy because we want people spend less money. Spending less money means contractionary fiscal. If we want people spend more money and stimulate demand, it's called expansionary fiscal policy. To maintain a balanced budget during a recession, what should the government do? So we know that in a recession, we will see a budget deficit because of expansionary fiscal policy. The government is going to spend more money than the revenue it collects. For that reason, if we want a balanced budget during the recessionary period, we should increase taxes, decrease transfer payments, and or decrease government spending. Question 9. Social security payments are a form of automatic stabilizer, and current retirees using funds from current contributions. And finally, question 10. Which of the following is a true statement about arguments for and against requiring a balanced federal budget in the US? One argument against a required balanced federal budget is that sometimes it's necessary or beneficial to large budget deficit in the short run. So this is the correct answer. The idea is very simple. We don't always need balanced budget, especially when we have COVID-19. If you remember the first couple months, people were losing their job. We needed that the government should spend money and pay for unemployment insurance. So in that case, government for sure is going to have a budget deficit. If the recession is very severe and that the impact is going to be huge, if you don't interfere with the economy, we prefer that government have a budget deficit rather than a balanced budget in case of economic downturns. For that reason, the first option is correct. Thank you for watching this video.